I think the way we are going to structure this conversation over the next half an hour or so is first 20 minutes, we'll be quizzing each other on various aspects of AI, longevity, life expectancy, and certain things. And then the last 10 odd minutes is Q&A where Anu is going to come on stage and moderate that. Anything you'd like to add, Marcus, to that?
No, thank you for coming. And I've got a question for you. Yeah. So we were talking about this conversation about longevity. And you had a very interesting framework wherein we're not just focusing on all of us living to be 120, 150, 200 and beyond, but in the Indian context, particularly, there's a different way of looking at it. So do you want to sort of set the scene on that?
Yeah, sure. So, the moment I read so I'm a clinician turned manager turned now startup person doing AI and research and all that. And when I got the email that, the topic of discussion was essentially how AI is boosting life expectancy and longevity, the first thing that struck me was that life expectancy is an average, right? It doesn't take socioeconomic status into context. It doesn't take genetics into context. It doesn't take any of those things. It's an average, right? And we unfortunately live in a country where today, our infant mortality rates are not very good. Our maternal mortality rates are not very good. Our people die of diarrhea, of all things. People die of lack of food, right? And here we are trying to do intermittent fasting, but it's a fact. So the framework we thought we'll take this conversation around is essentially how does one make sick into healthy, right? And thereby boost life expectancy, longevity, etc. at a population basis. And then there are obviously certain segment of population that are healthy. How do you make the healthy into healthier? So that was the broad framework that we were talking about.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So just to give you some statistics, right? I imagine a lot of engineers in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, or people who like data. The most recent results which McKinsey published, which was the McKinsey Health Institute, and this is data from 1960 to 2019. And the average extension in lifespan, i.e. number of years lived, has increased by 19 years, right? This is global average. In India, we've gone from, I think, 42, 43 years old from independence time to about 70 if you're a man today, right? So that's sort of the extension in the health span. But over half of our years are now spent sick or in a diseased state. This is the health span coefficient, right? How healthy are those years? And what's interesting, scary, is that the first onset of chronic disease is happening at a younger and younger and younger age, right? I have patients who are in their early 20s who are coming to me with fatty liver disease, not pre-diabetes, but full-blown insulin-resistant diabetes, et cetera, And I think the reason this is an important conversation to be having today in 2023 is if India is to truly realize its dreams of a 5 trillion plus economy, of having the youngest workforce being productive as well, unless we fix our health in the next 10 years, that demographic dividend is going to become a demographic disaster, right? Because of the spiraling costs of health, etc. So that's sort of my lens of how I see the sick to healthy and health to healthier.
Oh, fantastic. And just to play, and this is a very spontaneous thing, guys. If anybody has any questions, even during the 20 minutes, just, like raise your hand or just scream or just, start talking, whatever, we'll figure it out. I think from an AI perspective, right, since this is the AI session, the framework we look at, by we, I mean, like if I represent the health tech or the healthcare AI fraternity, is healthcare has essentially the following aspects, right? There is pre-disease, right, which is healthy, where you screen for disease, you try to either prevent or predict or detect undiagnosed disease. So that is at a population level. So let's just call it population health. Then, somebody gets a headache or somebody gets a backache or somebody gets fever, there's some ailment that happens. and the person comes into the realm of diagnostics, right? So there is no disease, and then you are trying to diagnose the disease. You're trying to figure out what disease the patient has. Subsequent to that is therapeutics, where you figured out what disease the patient has, then you give therapy, and then after therapy, there's long-term follow-up, and essentially the patient comes back into the screening pool or the broader population pool. So AI is having an impact across all of these axes, right? First, population health. India today has one of the world's most advanced AI-based tuberculosis screening programs. Right, we're proud to be part of one of those programs where there's an X-ray machine that literally looks like a digital camera from 15 years ago. So like it's this big, and you can literally go around town taking X-rays. That is connected to a laptop. The X-ray runs on battery, laptop runs on battery. You click an X-ray, there's an AI model embedded in the laptop, right, as a Docker container, embedded in the laptop that will look at that X-ray and tell you whether the patient has TB or not. And on the basis of, so there are hundreds of such machines doing the rounds in our villages where there is no electricity, and hence the batteries, screening the population for tuberculosis, and then trying to treat those patients as early in their journey as possible. The same thing for mammography, right, breast cancer screening. There's Niramai from here in Bangalore. I'm sure many of us may have heard of them. Mammography scans are being automatically read by AI globally. There's a study out of Sweden that says that these things are as good as humans, etc. So Google has a tool which you can look at the eye and tell if you're going to get diabetes or not. So infinite potential in that space. Anu works on has a full company that works on figuring out what you can do, what disease you're going to get from a genomic basis. So that's the preventive population health side of things. Then comes diagnostics, right? Again, you're doing blood tests, you're doing X-rays, MRI scans, CT scans. All of those are being read by AI today to a varied degree, either better or as well as human beings, and it's all getting there as AI is getting democratized. Further, that's the domain that we operate in. So automated diagnostics is happening, democratization of diagnostics is happening, and subsequent to that, therapeutics. I'm sure most of us here would know that drugs can now be created using AI. You don't need to inject them into a human or an animal to see what will happen. You can model the drug's output or the drug's pharmacokinetics and try to see what will happen to a patient when you give that drug. So NVIDIA has a full toolkit for it, like Google, Microsoft, everybody has toolkits just for this narrow domain. So suffice to say that all aspects of healthcare are being impacted by AI. Care delivery is being impacted. Generative AI, of course, the less you can talk about it all day long. But yeah, it's super exciting, and India has probably the greatest demand-supply mismatch, so it's most ripe for these technologies.
I think that was an interesting side. I operate on the other side of the spectrum, which is now looking at if you're healthy, how do you become healthier? And some of the things we've seen over the last 3 years has been the explosion of wearable devices. Right, my wife and I, we exchanged our wedding rings a few years ago. We gifted each other at least knowledge about sleep. We still have young kids, so we can't say we've gifted each other sleep yet, but an ability to have more measurements than a sleep lab. A glucose monitor on my arm sending me real-time glucose levels, heart rate variability. I was speaking with a runner in the foyer there about heart rate variability to help runners improve themselves. So the other part of the equation is now an explosion in data being generated through wearables and mobile-based technologies, which allow us a greater degree of insight on a person's physiology to then push him or her to a higher state of optimization.
So Marcus, can I ask a more specific question on that? So for folks in the audience, right, should everyone get like a CGM system? Should everyone get a smart ring, smart band, or is there like a specific type of person who should go for it? Like what's your general guidance in that?
So my philosophy is I can't...
And what are the, what are the results one can expect, right?
Yeah. And full disclaimer, I'm not an investor or owner of any of these types of things. So my philosophy is I can't treat what I can't measure. So it's very difficult for me in a world which is increasingly wanting to become proactive, participatory, personalized, and preventative to actually know you inside out if I don't have that insight on your biology. So a glucose monitor patch, given that 80% of people in the room are pre-diabetic or diabetic, provides a high degree of insight for a clinician to know.
Can you just emphasize that again?
80% are pre-diabetic or diabetic, right? It's a very scary number. And my definition of pre-diabetes even means fasting insulin raise, not just the A1C going up as well. So we, South Asians, our high carbohydrate-rich diets, our sedentary lifestyle, et cetera, puts us at risk. So these simple devices allows an individual to understand how their unique biology, which is a composition of the microbiome, which I know Anu has a test for, your genetics, your physiology, and how you respond to different foods. Because Vidur, if you and I had the same bowl of white rice, brown rice, red rice, and black rice, we will both respond very differently to our glycemic curves around that. So just one example why I particularly like these types of devices. Same with sleep. So I work with IPL cricketers and high performance athletes, and the ability to give them an insight into their sleep pattern pre-game, post-game, their deep sleep versus their REM sleep, and how important deep sleep is for physical repair and REM sleep is for cognitive focus, can really change the mindset of an individual to prioritize certain behaviors and then start to shift them. Because we see if you put a device on someone, irrespective of whether it's collecting data or not, it almost has a placebo effect. And we actually can change their behaviors just by them thinking that device is being collected on them.
No, I've seen that happen to me, and I say that, as I pull in my Punjabi tummy, the fact that I had once upon a time a band on, and I was measuring things actually forced me to take more steps and all of that. Like, I think that's general, general human behavior. Tell us a little bit, again, we talked about, you touched upon health span.
Yeah.
But, there's this full notion that of health span versus lifespan,
Yeah.
and how you can maybe tweak it a
Yeah.
little. Could you
Yeah.
share your thoughts?
So again, going back to basics, mathematics, x-axis is lifespan, number of years lived. Y-axis is coefficient of health, how healthy are those years. So we're living in a world where, as I was describing, the number of years is extending towards the right-hand side. We're living for more and more years. But our goal is to live healthier for more and more years. So if you imagine the curve of the graph, where as we're young, we have almost the status of 100%, and then slowly it begins to dip off until mortality. The goal is to stretch that curve so that you're not just living more number of years, but you're extending the health span. The ideal line, assuming we don't live forever, the ideal line would almost be a rectangle, where you live a very, very good quality of health throughout your life until one day the inevitable mortality event happens, and that's the end of life.
So, and is there a framework to get to that? Like, how do people in the audience
I keep it simple, right? I'm not as smart as you. I didn't go to so I've got a 5-pillar structure: sleep, eat, move, breathe, and connect. And what does this mean? Sleep, I always start with sleep. It's the foundation of good health and performance and well-being, right? We can't do anything without sleep. We need 7 to 8 hours, and I could talk for hours on it, but sleep is the first step. Eating right? A diet which has the right macronutrients, more protein, more fiber, more fat, less carbohydrate, supplementation, hydration, minimize caffeination, minimize alcohol.
Minimize caffeination,
1 to
minimize
2.
alcohol.
Yeah.
Okay.
So caffeine is good. 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day is good, but in a particular time band, right? The third is movement. Movement is really important, right? We have sedentary lifestyles. Every year Fitbit publishes a scorecard where India scores the worst. On average, anyone want to guess how many steps the average Indian who wears a Fitbit walks every day? Someone said 8,000. No. 4,000? Huh? 2,600 steps, right? And that's wearing the band. Imagine if you're not wearing the band, right? So we need to move more. And remember, guys, movement is 5 forms: aerobic, walking, swimming, cycling, running; anaerobic, HIIT, Tabata, racket sports, uses a lactate pyruvate pathway; Strength training, very important to maintain muscle mass, flexibility, and balance. We need all five forms, right? Our body's a machine, machines require movement to stay healthy. The fourth pillar is breathe, stress mitigation, the power of breath work, and how we can accelerate the parasympathetic nervous system and bring down the fight and flight response.
So anyone from Delhi here?
Yeah. Or Bombay.
I think the rest of us just died. I guess. Oh, and Bombay now too. Yeah.
Yeah. So stress response, and then finally connect. And the reason why a clinician physician is talking about connection with self and others, is because the longest longitudinal study ever done, which is Harvard, looked at people over the course of their lifetime, and they found that the biggest contributor to living a long, healthy life was not how many cigarettes you smoked, how many alcohol drinks you had, or your family history of disease. It was whether you have a sense of purpose, whether you had a social tribe, and whether you had joy in your life, right? So it's really important. We're living increasingly nuclear lives. Technology is connecting us but disconnecting us like never before. Loneliness is a pandemic that we see all around us. So connection is a really important part of that longevity framework as well. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And you just mentioned mortality.
Yes.
As if it is something that cannot be tackled.
Yeah. You have a very
So
interesting
I think
Black Mirror like framework. Yeah.
Framework is a strong word. So essentially, guys, again, linking all of this back to AI, right? There's a thought experiment, right? What if you could take all of my WhatsApp chats, feed them into an LLM, and then start chatting with the LLM as if it's Vidur, right? Will I not die ever, right? And then you can also give me a live feed of current events. So, and maybe a live feed from Instagram, Facebook of my family, so that I have current event knowledge of them too. And then on top of that LLM, you can layer some video encoding technology. And at least from a video perspective, I don't die. Right. So, yeah, I think that's where also technologies like Neuralink, etc., are trying to get to, right? Brain computer interfaces and all that. So since this was a session on longevity, and it's this immortality, you're today seeing it in real life in the form of chatbots, right? Where one customer service agent is actually present in 5 or dealing with 5 patients. In fact, we were talking about Marcus's company, right, where he's essentially trying to take his own knowledge and put it into a agent of sorts, right? So there is that whole angle of life expectancy, longevity, and good, bad, ugly, we don't know, but yeah, that we wanted to just call out.
We're going to ask the audience for some questions now. Yeah. Can I ask the audience a question before you guys ask us? Right. So how many of you would like to live 80 and above? Assuming no one wants to live 80 and below. How many would like to live 80 and above? Okay. Keep your hands raised. So the rest of people who are not raising their hands, that's because it's less than 80 or more than 80? Less than 80. Let's try 60 and above. Most hands go up. 70 and above. Keep your hands up. 80 and above. 90 and above. 100 and above. 120 and above. It's almost like I'm doing a bid, right? And anyone here want to live forever, immortal? One person, two people in the room. 2.5. You're not quite sure. Okay. That's really interesting. The reason I asked that is when I asked the question about 60 and above, and this goes back to the core essence of what longevity means.
Maybe ask the question about your kids. Till what age would you want your kids to live?
Ah, okay. That's an emotional sentiment there. And yeah. No, but this is important because when we have a perspective of longevity today, the 60 and above statement, the equation of health span means that we're trying to build a framework for society where it's not the frailty associated with the current 60, 70, 80-year-old, right? The entire effort, aging is a disease. How do we mitigate the disease process in our young years so that we can continue to live a healthy, vibrant life for as long as possible? Yeah. Anu.
So any questions? Please raise your hand and somebody will come and give you the mic. There is one question right there.
So my question is to Dr. Marcus and of course you, Vidur. You spoke about the lifespan and the health span, right? So of late, and then of course AI and technology has a lot of predictive theories today to kind of take into consideration. My question is, despite all of this being available, we see very healthy people, losing lives very early, right? This trend has increased of late. So how do you explain that, and what could be the reason?
Wow, I was not expecting that one. Very good question. And I think we've all probably know of a first degree or someone within our social circle which this has affected. The reality is that our lens of what healthy is quite an aesthetic perspective or a very physical fitness perspective. Typically, the stories are of colleagues running a marathon or in an Ironman event or some sort of sporting event, etc. I'm assuming that there's no background of genetic disorder, which could happen in a cardiovascular-like state. But we must appreciate that our lives are very unhealthy because we jokingly spoke about the air quality. It's the equivalent in Bombay of smoking a packet of cigarettes a day. I think in Delhi it's about 27, 28 cigarettes a day, right? The water is toxic. Our food is basically nutrient-less. We have cortisol levels. I measure 24-hour cortisol levels on all of my patients. And this week alone, I can't think of a single patient that didn't come back with a positive across all 4 of those 24-hour segments that we measure, right? So we have lives which are stressed, environments which are toxic, working life imbalances. All of this contributes to our state of health, which is why we need to ensure that we've got a holistic, we need to take a holistic integrative view of lens, which goes beyond just the physical health, i.e., can you run a marathon, can you play a sport?
I think there was a question at the back of that. Loud enough. I think.
I think Mr. Narayan Murthy had some comments about that this week, right? Do you want to have a stab at
Yeah,
that?
I think it's a philosophical question. Of course, it's a health question, and the
Can you use the mic so we can?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm from the news business, and we face this every day, more so in the era of television and now internet.
I think the short answer would be it's a option that the person in the situation exercises, right? If you are a news media professional and choosing to work 16 hours a day as opposed to 8 hours a day, it's the same as choosing to eat McDonald's over a salad or something like that. That's the way I think of it, right? You do it because you love it, number one. Does it have a negative effect on you? I don't know if that can be mitigated. Like I want to work 16 hours a day. There's enough startup founders out there. There's enough consultants, enough high intellect performing lawyers, people out there who I'm sure are Marcus's clients. I don't know what guidance you give to them.
Yeah, I think we need to divide this into the people who love it, enjoy it, versus the people who have to do it from a survival or from an aspirational perspective. I've got, the company that I founded, Human Edge, we work with about 100 corporates around the world, and a lot of those corporations have employees who I work with who are, let's say, shift pattern workers, right? And for them, they don't realize it because they're doing it at such a young age that the sleep deficit that they are having laid down is having a massive metabolic consequence to them, not just now, but for the next 3, 4, 5 decades. I've seen testosterone levels like sub 100 for men, which is absurd really, when normal should be like 400, 600 to 900 range. Fasting insulin levels above 40, when normal should be 5 or below. So I completely resonate with the question. I don't have an answer for societal fix. All I can individually do is try to change the world one person at a time. Yeah.
Last question, Ranjini.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting topic. So, Marcus, I'm reading this book called Outlive, which talks
Peter's book, yeah.
exactly, which talks a lot about the things you're talking about, right? Where it refers to medicine 3.0, how you can increase longevity, but at the same time stay healthy as well. And it does talk about all the factors like sleep and nutrition. But something I wonder about is this is a concept which folks probably in the West are very aware of. They take interventions, and there's also a lot of startups which are in this space, right? So similar to the previous discussion, I sometimes wonder, is this going to become another topic of have versus have-nots in a country where the environment is not conducive, where there's no awareness? How do we even tackle something like this, right? That's something I would love to hear your perspective
Yeah,
on.
no, lovely question. So the book she's referring to is a book called Outlive by Peter Attia, very well-respected medical physician in the US, and he has an incredible podcast called The Drive as well. I disagree with you partially because of the work which has come out of Blue Zone work, the Dan Boitner's. This is a Netflix documentary, but Dan's been doing this for 20 years now, where basically studying communities around the world which have a super centenarian probability above and beyond the rest of the population. And there were 5 that were discovered. And these 5 were all, apart from the La Jolla in Florida, all of them were in remote communities disconnected with a low socioeconomic affordability spend, right? So simple lives, which we, I think, in the pursuit of materialistic success have forgotten. And now we're having to invent, and I'm equally to blame, but we are inventing and creating digital tools to counteract that issue. So I think if we look at the smaller communities who are disconnected or in remote parts, their lifestyles actually are much more aligned and in tuned with this simple framework around sleeping well, eating well, moving daily, spending time with people, and mitigation of stress. I think it's for us and the people in the room in this very toxic type of environment that we now have to create a tech solution for the tech that we've built to live the lives that we want to be tech-based as well. Yeah.
So how about genetic disposition, right? I can eat, right, only veg, I can run marathons, but still lipid profile would be very bad because of genetic reasons, right? So cardiovascular or even cancer, there is a very high role of genetic disposition, right? So how tech or AI can help to equalize this?
Do what, sorry?
Genetic disposition.
Genetic disposition, sorry, okay. Anu is probably much better qualified to answer this. Determinants of longevity. Your probability of living to be 100 years plus, 80% of that is roughly, about 78 to 80% of that is down to 3 things: the people you spend time with, the environment that you're immersed in, and the decisions that you make in your day-to-day lives. The remaining 20%, nature, nurture, which we were talking about, is down to the genomic information that you carry. So it's absolutely true for certain diseases like breast cancer, Huntington's disease. There is a very clear one-to-one mapping where a carrier creates an outcome. For other types of chronic diseases, it's multimodal. So many different genomic contributions, which epigenetically get transcribed through lifestyle choices, which then puts you at risk. So I find it frustrating individually when individuals come to me and say, "But doc, it's my genes," or it's just who I am. It's there in your genes, but you have a much greater control over the outcome of that based on these 3 things that I was just describing. Yeah. Anu, you want to mention something about nature versus nurture?
I think when you look at polygenic diseases like cardiovascular and others that you mentioned, there is obviously there's some role of genes, but there's also a lot of role of what you do with that information. So in many ways, they say genetics loads the gun, but your environment pulls the trigger. So I think that's part of what we want to make sure that people understand that, some genetics will predispose you to certain things, but there are many ways that you can counter it. And that's the whole point of having this discussion.